The neighborhood was the kind of place people didn't talk about on the news. Not because it was rich, not because it was famous, but because it was quiet. A street where kids played football after school, where old men sat outside small tea shops, where mothers walked home without fear. At least, it used to be like that. Because for the last few months, a gang had turned the area into their playground. They came on motorbikes. They shouted like they owned the street. They bullied shopkeepers for protection money. They scared teenagers for fun. And everyone knew the worst part. Nobody could stop them. Not the locals. Not the shop owners. Not even the police, who always arrived after it was too late. That evening, the sun was dipping low, painting the streets orange when the gang appeared again. 5 bikes screeched into the area like wolves entering a quiet village. They stopped in front of a small corner grocery store. Inside was Mr. Khalid, an old shopkeeper who had been running that store for 20 years. The gang leader stepped forward, tall, cocky, chewing gum like he had no fear in the world. "Old man," he said loudly, slamming his hand on the counter. "Where's my money?" Mr. Khalid trembled. I already paid last week," he whispered. The gang leader laughed. "That was last week. Today is today." He grabbed a jar of candy and threw it on the floor. Glass shattered. Kids outside froze. A few neighbors peeked from their windows, but quickly pulled the curtains back. When people live under fear for too long, even small violence becomes normal. The gang leader leaned closer to the old man. "I swear if you don't pay, I'll shut this whole store down." That's when it happened. A calm voice spoke from outside the shop. "Put it back." The entire gang turned. Standing at the entrance was a man in a simple dark jacket, broad shoulders, a still, controlled posture. Eyes sharp but calm. He wasn't young. He wasn't loud. But something about him made the air feel heavier. The gang leader blinked once, then smirked. "Who the heck are you?" The man stepped inside slowly. "No one important," he replied. Then he looked at the broken glass, the frightened kids outside, and the trembling shopkeeper. "But I don't tolerate injustice." The gang members laughed like hyenas. One of them shoved the man's shoulder. "Grandpa, you want to be a hero?" The man didn't move, not even a little. He simply turned his head, slowly, and locked eyes with the gang leader. "You picked the wrong street," he said. The gang leader's smile disappeared. For the first time, the gang felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but warning. Some people don't need to raise their voice to show power. Their presence is enough. The gang leader stepped closer, jaw tight. "Old man, you're about to regret that." The man's face remained calm. He only said one final sentence. "Then let's begin." And the neighborhood, after months of silence, finally witnessed the moment everything changed. Have you ever seen gangs or bullies harass innocent people in your area? Comment yes or no. The air inside the small grocery store turned cold. Not because of the evening breeze, but because the gang leader, Ray, didn't like being challenged. Ray was the type of man who didn't just want money. He wanted fear. He wanted people to look down when he walked past. He wanted mothers to pull their children inside. He wanted shopkeepers to smile nervously just to survive. And this calm stranger standing in front of him, he wasn't afraid. Ray stared at the man's face, trying to understand what made him so confident. "Who sent you?" Ray asked, voice sharp. The man didn't answer the way Ray expected. Nobody threatened. Nobody begged. Instead, the man quietly bent down and picked up one of the broken candy jars from the floor. He placed it back on the counter like it mattered. Then he looked at Mr. Khalid and said gently, "Are you okay?" Mr. Khalid didn't speak. His lips trembled. His eyes were watery. He only nodded. When people are terrorized daily, they stop believing help exists. Even kindness becomes shocking. Ray laughed in disbelief. "This is funny," he said, pointing at the stranger. "You're acting like some kind of protector." One gang member, short, aggressive, full of ego, stepped forward. "Boss, let me handle this old man." He shoved the stranger's chest again, harder this time, but the stranger didn't stumble. He didn't even blink. His feet stayed planted like the ground belonged to him. That's when the neighborhood began to notice. Outside, kids had stopped playing. A few teenagers stood frozen, staring. An old lady across the road covered her mouth with her hand, and slowly, Quietly, people began pulling out their phones. In today's world, the truth spreads faster than fear. One video can expose what silence hides. Ray noticed the phones. His eyes narrowed. He hated being recorded, but he hated looking weak even more. He took one step closer until his face was inches away from the man. "You new around here," Ray said. "So let me explain how this works." Ray grabbed Mr. Khaled's collar and yanked him forward. "This old man pays," Ray continued, "or he loses his store." He turned his head back to the stranger. "And you?" He poked the stranger's shoulder with his finger. "You walk away. Right now. Before I embarrass you." The stranger finally looked directly at Ray. His expression didn't change. No anger. No panic. Just calm certainty. "You don't need money," the stranger said softly. "You need control." Ray's smile twitched. "What did you just say?" The stranger spoke again, still calm. Still quiet. "You're not strong," he said. "You're just loud." That line hit like a slap. The gang went silent for half a second. Then everyone erupted. "Oh, did he just say that? Boss, break him." Ray's face turned red. He swung his fist toward the stranger's jaw. Fast, but before the punch could land, the stranger moved. Not dramatic, not flashy, just smooth, minimal motion. He caught Ray's wrist midair and held it. Ray's eyes widened. He tried to pull back. He couldn't. It was like his hand was trapped in steel. The stranger leaned closer and whispered so only Ray could hear. "You don't want to do this." Ray panicked, trying to free himself. "Let go of me." The stranger didn't tighten his grip. He didn't attack. He simply held Ray's wrist long enough to make a point. Then let go. Ray stumbled back, shocked. The crowd outside gasped. Ray wasn't used to anyone touching him like that. Nobody dared. Ray stepped back in, trying to save his ego. "You think you're tough?" he shouted. "You think you're special?" The stranger replied, "I'm just someone who's tired of watching people suffer." Mr. Khaled whispered, voice shaking. "Please just leave, they'll destroy you." The stranger looked at him, and for the first time, Mr. Khaled saw something in the man's eyes. Not pride, not rage, but discipline. "You've been quiet too long," the stranger told him. That's why they grew bold. Ray's anger reached its peak. He lifted his hand and snapped his fingers. Instantly, 2 gang members moved to block the door. Another stepped outside to call more men, and Ray smiled like a man about to enjoy violence. "All right," Ray said slowly. "If you want to play hero, we'll make an example out of you." The stranger took a slow breath. Then he removed his jacket, calmly, like he was preparing for a workout. He folded it neatly, placed it on the counter, and said one chilling line. "Then come closer." This wasn't bravery. This was experience. The kind of calm you only see in people who've faced danger their whole life. Outside, the phones kept recording, because everyone could feel it. Tonight wasn't going to end like the other nights. Tonight, the hunters had just met someone who didn't run. What should the man do next? A, walk away to stay safe. B, call the police. C, teach them a lesson right there. The moment the man folded his jacket and placed it on the counter, the entire store went silent. Even the gang members, who had been laughing seconds ago, stopped for a moment. Because confidence like that wasn't normal. This wasn't the fake bravery of someone trying to impress a crowd. This was the calm of someone who already knew the outcome. Ray tried to hide his uncertainty with anger. He signaled at his crew. "Get him!" 2 gang members rushed in first. Young, reckless, hungry for attention. One swung a wild punch toward the man's head. The man didn't step back. He stepped in. In one smooth motion, he redirected the punch with his forearm and grabbed the attacker's elbow like he was controlling a puppet. A quick twist. The attacker dropped to his knees with a painful gasp, his arm locked in a position he couldn't escape. The second attacker tried to tackle the man from behind, but the man turned, shifted his weight, and with a short, controlled movement, threw him down using his own momentum. The attacker hit the floor hard, coughing in shock. The crowd outside gasped. Phones rose higher. Real fighters don't use power first. They use control. And the more aggressive the opponent, the easier they fall. Ray's eyes widened. He didn't expect that. He expected an old man who would break easily. Instead, he was watching his own men drop like they had been trained to lose. Ray stepped back and snarled. All right, enough games. He pulled out a small knife from his pocket. Not to kill, but to terrify. That's what Ray always did. Flash danger so others would submit. The neighborhood had seen it before, and every time people looked away. But this time, the man didn't flinch. He looked at the knife like it was nothing more than a loud toy. You're making a bad decision, the man said calmly. Ray's lips curled into a cruel grin. You think I care? He pointed the knife forward. I'm going to carve respect into you. Mr. College shouted, voice breaking. Stop, please. Just leave him alone. Ray didn't even look at the shopkeeper. Instead, he took one step forward toward the man. But the man raised his hand calmly, not as a threat, as a warning. Listen carefully, the man said in a low voice. I don't want to hurt anyone. Ray laughed loudly. Hurt? You already hurt my pride. And with that, Ray rushed forward, knife aimed for the man's chest. Everything happened fast, but the man was faster. He shifted his body sideways, grabbed Ray's wrist, and stopped the knife like it hit an invisible wall. Ray tried to force it forward. He couldn't. The man's grip was steady, not shaking, not struggling, just total control. Then the man leaned in and said something quiet. Ray's face changed, because he finally understood what that grip meant. It wasn't strength. It was training. Ray tried to free his wrist. The man twisted gently, just enough pressure. Ray's fingers loosened. The knife dropped to the floor with a clink. The entire neighborhood heard it. The moment felt like a giant bell rang. Ray looked down, then up, and, for the first time, fear crawled into his eyes. Predators are only brave when they believe the other person is weak. But the moment they lose control, their confidence collapses. Ray backed up, breathing fast. One of his gang members shouted, Boss, more guys are coming. Outside, the sound of motorbikes grew louder. More gang members were arriving. 6, 7, 8. They surrounded the store like vultures circling prey. The neighbors panicked again. Kids rushed inside homes. Shop shutters slammed down. But still, phones continued recording from windows. Because everybody could sense it. Something bigger was happening. The man walked slowly to the door of the store. Not to escape. To face them. He stepped outside. The street light above him flickered, as if even electricity was nervous. The gang members formed a line, laughing, spreading their arms. Ray stood behind them, rubbing his wrist with anger. You think you won? Ray shouted. You embarrassed me in front of my own people. The man looked around at the gang. He didn't look scared. He didn't look excited. He looked disappointed. This neighborhood doesn't belong to you, he said. One gang member spit on the ground. We take what we want. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. And that's why you keep losing, he replied. Ray screamed. Crush him. The gang rushed at once. A chaotic wave of fists and rage. But the man moved like water. He didn't throw wild punches. He used clean, defensive counters. One attacker swung. He blocked and pushed him away. Another tried to grab him. He broke the grip and used a simple throw. Two rushed together. He stepped between them and knocked one into the other. It wasn't flashy. It was efficient and terrifying, because the more they attacked, the more they fell. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence, because for months, this gang looked unstoppable. And now, they looked helpless. Ray stood frozen. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then, his anger turned into desperation. He shouted at his men, Get him, all of you. But the man's voice cut through the chaos. Stop. Not shouted, not screamed, just a single strong word. And strangely, even a gang slowed down. Because authority isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. The man pointed at the street. You want to fight? He said. Then fight me one by one. Ray's men hesitated, because deep down they already knew they weren't fighting a normal man. When a bully meets someone who doesn't fear pain, the bully's biggest weapon, fear, stops working. Ray clenched his fists and stepped forward again. You still haven't told me who you are, he yelled. The man looked at him, his expression cold now, and he said, I'm the consequence. Ray swallowed hard. The street had never felt so quiet. Then the man took one step forward, and everything was about to change forever. Should the man end this now, or give them one final warning? Comment, end IT or warning. The street didn't feel like a street anymore. It felt like a courtroom. And everyone, the shopkeepers, the old men, the kids watching from windows, could sense it. This wasn't just a fight. This was a moment of justice happening right in front of them. The gang stood in a loose circle, breathing hard, shaking off embarrassment. Some held their shoulders. Some wiped blood from their lips. Not serious injuries, but enough to show one thing clearly. They had finally met someone who could shut their violence down. Ray, the leader, watched with rage boiling in his chest. He didn't fear pain. He feared humiliation. Because gangs survive on one currency: reputation. And tonight, his reputation was being destroyed in 4K. He looked around and saw the phone cameras. He saw the neighbors filming from balconies. He saw teenagers whispering. Ray snarled at the crowd. "Stop recording." But nobody listened. For the first time in months, the neighborhood wasn't afraid. When fear breaks, people don't need weapons. They only need courage. Ray turned his eyes back to the calm man standing in the center. That man hadn't even changed expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't acting like a hero. He was simply present. Ray stepped closer, voice shaking with anger. "You think you're some kind of savior?" The man replied with a calm tone that made Ray feel small. "I'm not saving anyone," he said. "I'm reminding you that you're not untouchable." One gang member, tall and desperate, charged again, trying to prove loyalty. But the man didn't even fully turn. He lifted one hand, blocked, and used the attacker's momentum to push him down. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just clean, controlled movement. The attacker fell to the pavement, stunned. That was the moment whispers started spreading through the crowd. A teenage boy leaned to his friend. "Bro, that guy moves like an action movie." A shopkeeper murmured. "No, it's not acting. That's real skill." An old uncle on the balcony squinted and said slowly, "That face. I've seen that face somewhere." And then, a woman across the street gasped. She pulled her phone closer to her face and zoomed in. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. She whispered, "No way." The crowd began murmuring louder. "Who is he? Is he a cop? Is he military? Why does he look familiar?" Ray heard the whispers, and it made him furious. Because he wasn't just losing a fight. He was losing control of the narrative. Ray snapped at his men. "Enough. Step back." They obeyed quickly, not because Ray was commanding, but because they were confused. Because deep down, they were beginning to question something they never questioned before. What if we picked the wrong target? Ray breathed hard and pointed at the man. "You still didn't tell me who you are," Ray said. The man didn't answer. He looked at the neighborhood instead. He glanced at Mr. Khalid standing in the store doorway, trembling. He glanced at the kids watching from windows. He glanced at the scared mothers holding their children. Then he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This street belongs to the innocent," he said. "Not to cowards who need numbers to feel strong." The crowd went silent. Because no one had ever spoken like that here. Not publicly. Not without fear. A bully doesn't fear fists. A bully fears exposure. Ray couldn't take it anymore. He turned to one of his men. "Call Jax," he barked. The gang member hesitated. Ray grabbed him by the shirt. "I said call Jax." The man quickly pulled out his phone and made the call. The crowd didn't know who Jax was, but the way the gang reacted told them everything. The name itself carried fear, even among criminals. Ray turned back to the calm man and gave a bitter smile. "You're good," Ray admitted. "I'll give you that." Then his face hardened. "But you don't understand. This neighborhood is our business." He leaned forward. "And nobody interferes with our business." The calm man's eyes didn't move. "Then change your business," he replied. Ray laughed coldly. "You really think you can end us alone?" The calm man spoke one sentence. "I don't need to end you. You'll end yourselves." The crowd felt chills. Because that wasn't confidence. That sounded like certainty. And then, the sound of engines roared again. But this time, it wasn't 5 bikes. It was many. A convoy. Headlights flooded the street like a wave. The neighbors froze. Some people stopped filming and backed away. Even the gang members looked nervous now. 5 black bikes rolled in slowly, powerful and heavy. The leader of that group stepped off. He was bigger than Ray, older, covered in tattoos, and his face looked like it had never smiled in years. That was Jax. When Jax walked, the street felt smaller. He looked at Ray first. Ray tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Boss, this guy. Jax lifted a hand, silencing Ray without effort. Then Jax looked at the comm man. He didn't ask questions. He didn't threaten at first. He simply stared, and the comm man stared back. Two storms facing each other. Jax finally spoke. Low voice. Dangerous. You made my boy look weak. The comm man didn't flinch. I didn't do that, he replied. Jax's eyes narrowed. Then who did? The man answered. He did, by bullying innocent people. Jax smirked. That's how streets work. The comm man's voice became even colder now. No, he said. That's how cowards work. The crowd held their breath. Because now, it wasn't a gang of kids. It was a real criminal leader. And if violence was going to happen, it would be ugly. But still, the man remained calm. Jax walked closer. Who are you, he asked. Because you move like a trained killer. The man paused. And for the first time, he finally spoke his identity, without arrogance, without drama. Steven, he said simply. Just Steven. But that name hit the crowd. The woman who had zoomed earlier gasped again. Her voice shook. That's Steven Seagal. The whisper spread like fire. Steven Seagal? No way. Legend. That's him. Ray's face turned pale. Jax blinked for the first time. Not fear, but recognition. Because Jax had seen him before, in a different world. Jax's tone changed slightly. You're that Steven. Steven didn't smile. He didn't brag. He only said, I'm the man who doesn't tolerate injustice. Jax stared for a long second, then looked around at the cameras, filming him. And suddenly, Jax realized the trap. If he attacked Steven here, he'd be exposed. The city would watch. The law would wake up. The neighborhood would unite. When criminals are recorded, their power dies. Jax leaned closer and whispered, This isn't over. Steven replied in the same calm voice. It already is. Jax stepped back slowly, then signaled his crew. Not retreating out of fear, retreating out of strategy. But the look in his eyes promised one thing. He would return. Bigger, more violent, more desperate. And the neighborhood could feel it. Because the real war was about to begin. Do you think Jax will come back for revenge? Comment. Yes or no. And tell me, what should Steven do next? That night, the neighborhood didn't sleep. Not because of excitement. Because of fear. The gang had left, but their silence felt louder than their engines. Everyone knew one thing. Jax didn't retreat out of weakness. He retreated to plan something worse. And when criminals feel humiliated, they don't aim for fairness. They aim for revenge. Mr. Khalid closed his shop early. Teenagers stayed inside. Mothers kept their children away from windows. Even the air felt tense, like the street itself was holding its breath. Only Steven looked calm, as if nothing had happened. He walked home slowly, hands in his pockets, like a man taking a peaceful evening stroll. But inside his apartment, Steven wasn't relaxing. He stood near the window, watching the street like a soldier. Real warriors don't celebrate victory. They prepare for the next wave. Around 2:17 a.m., a car door shut quietly. Then another. Then another. Dark vehicles rolled into the neighborhood without headlights. They parked at the corner like shadows. Men stepped out. Not loud gang kids. These were older, cleaner, meaner, professional violence. Jax had returned, and this time he brought predators. They moved like a pack. Silent. Coordinated. And their target wasn't the grocery store anymore. Their target was Steven. One of them spoke into a radio. Eagle is in position. Moving. They approached Steven's building from different angles. One carried a metal bat. One had a chain wrapped around his fist. One had a knife. This wasn't about scaring people. This was about sending a message. The neighborhood cameras, still mounted on some buildings, caught the shadows. But the people inside didn't dare step out. Because courage is hard. Until you see someone prove fear can be beaten. Upstairs, Steven's eyes narrowed. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply reached into a drawer, pulled out a pair of gloves, wore them slowly, then took a deep breath, and stepped out, not running, walking, down the stairs calmly, as if he wanted them to see his face. He opened the building door, and the ambush began. 5 men rushed him instantly. Fast, brutal. One swung a bat straight at Steven's head. Steven tilted his body, just slightly. The bat missed by inches and smashed into the wall. Steven grabbed the attacker's wrist and slammed his elbow into it. Crack! The bat dropped. The attacker screamed and fell back. Another rushed with the chain. Steven caught the chain mid-swing, twisted it, and yanked the man forward. Then, Steven's knee rose sharply into the attacker's stomach. The man folded like paper. Before he could fall, Steven turned him and used him as a shield, because the third attacker charged with a knife. The knife struck his own teammate's shoulder instead. The attacker froze in shock. Steven didn't waste time. He grabbed the knife attacker's arm, twisted, and slammed him to the ground. Hard. The street echoed with the impact. Steven wasn't fighting like a street brawler. He was fighting like a man trained to control chaos. More men rushed, but the more they attacked, the more they realized the truth. They weren't hunting him. They were feeding him opportunities. Steven moved with brutal efficiency. No wasted energy. No dramatic moves. Only precision. One man tried to tackle Steven from behind. Steven stepped aside and redirected him into a concrete pillar. The man hit it and dropped instantly. Another swung the bat again. Steven blocked it with his forearm, stepped inside the attacker's space, and struck the man's chest with a short punch that looked small, but sounded like a cannon. The attacker's breath vanished. He stumbled, choking, collapsing. Then Steven stopped. He didn't chase them. He didn't scream. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, breathing calmly, like the fight hadn't raised his heartbeat. And then the street went quiet again, because only one figure was still standing. Jax stepped out of the shadows slowly. Clap, clap, clap. Mock applause. Not bad, Jax said. You really are Steven Seagal. Steven stared at him. You brought knives to a neighborhood, Steven said coldly. In front of families. Jax smiled like a demon. I brought fear, he replied. That's what you tried to steal from me. Steven took one step forward, and that step alone made Jax's smile flicker. Steven's voice was calm but heavy. You don't control people with fear, Steven said. You control them by destroying their hope. Steven pointed at the men groaning on the ground. And tonight you're going to learn what it feels like when hope fights back. Jax snapped his fingers. 2 more men emerged behind Steven, trying to trap him. But Steven didn't turn. He already knew. He shifted his weight. And the moment one grabbed his shoulder, Steven twisted, grabbed the arm, and slammed the attacker forward into the other man. They collided violently. Steven turned to Jax again, still calm. Jax's face changed. Not fear, but realization. He wasn't dealing with a man who could fight. He was dealing with a man who could end a fight. Steven walked closer to Jax. Jax backed up a step. Steven spoke slowly. You think you're powerful because people fear you. Then he leaned in. But fear doesn't last forever. Jax tried to swing. Steven caught his wrist instantly, like before. But this time, Steven didn't let go quickly. He squeezed just enough pressure to make Jax's knees buckle. Jax gritted his teeth, trying not to show pain. Steven whispered, This is your last warning. Jax trembled, furious. Then Steven released him and stepped back. Leave, Steven said, and don't ever return. Jax stared at him, breathing like a wounded animal. Then he signaled his crew to retreat. They dragged the injured men into the cars. Engines started. Dark vehicles rolled away into the night. But Jax lowered his window for one final line. This neighborhood isn't over. Steven didn't move. He simply replied, It is for you. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt safer. Not because the police came, but because justice finally showed up in human form. Was Steven right to end it this way? Comment. Right or too brutal? And tell me, should Jax face law punishment next? The night after the ambush, the neighborhood woke up like it had survived a war. Broken glass on the road. A few bloodstains on the pavement. Tire marks near the corner. And most importantly, something the people hadn't felt in months. Hope. Neighbors slowly stepped outside, cautious at first. Mr. Khalid opened his shop with shaking hands. Teenagers gathered near the street where the fight happened. A few kids stood wide-eyed, pointing at the ground like it was sacred. Because last night wasn't just a fight. It was a message. A message that said, you don't have to stay a victim forever. Steven walked out of his building in the morning, quiet as usual. No celebration. No pride. No hero body language. He carried a small bag in one hand, like he was heading out for a normal day. But the neighborhood didn't see him as normal anymore. People stared from a distance, not in fear, in respect. A mother held her child's hand and whispered, "That's the man who saved us." An old uncle murmured, "A man like that doesn't come here by accident." Steven didn't acknowledge any of it. He just kept walking. But as he passed Mr. College's shop, Mr. College came rushing out. His voice cracked. "Sir, please wait." Steven stopped. Mr. College's eyes were wet. "For months," he said, "they made us feel like we were nothing, like we deserved it." His hands trembled. "And last night, you stood up when we couldn't." Steven looked at him calmly. "You didn't deserve it," Steven replied. "You tolerated it because you had no support." Mr. College swallowed hard. "But why?" he asked. "Why did you risk your life for us?" Steven's answer was simple, almost cold. "Because I've seen what happens when people stay silent too long. Some men don't fight for attention. They fight because they hate injustice." Just then, sirens echoed in the distance. And for the first time, the neighborhood didn't feel relief. It felt anger, because everyone knew, if the police had done their job earlier, none of this would have happened. 2 patrol cars arrived, then another. Officers stepped out and started looking around like they were investigating. But the neighborhood wasn't impressed. A few shopkeepers muttered, "Now they show up." A teen shouted, "Where were you when we begged for help?" The police tried to control the scene. "We've received reports of violence," one officer said loudly. Then his eyes landed on Steven. His expression changed. He walked closer, narrowing his eyes, studying Steven's face. Steven didn't move. The officer took another step. Then, suddenly, his posture shifted, almost like he recognized authority. He whispered, "Sir." Steven said nothing. The officer swallowed hard. He turned toward the other officers and spoke quickly. "Step back." The other cops looked confused. "What?" one asked. The officer replied, "You don't know who this is." The crowd leaned in. Phones came out again. A woman in the crowd shouted, "Tell us then." The officer looked at Steven respectfully and spoke clearly. "That's Steven Seagal." The street froze. A wave of whispers exploded instantly. "Steven Seagal? No way. That's him. The legend. That's the action hero." People started searching on their phones, zooming in, comparing images, and the truth became undeniable. It was him, the same face they'd seen in movies, the same calm presence, the same warrior energy. Steven Seagal was standing in their neighborhood, like he belonged there. Sometimes the world sends help in the most unexpected form. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Steven, "we didn't know you were involved." Steven stared at him, and his next words hit harder than any punch. "You didn't know your citizens were being terrorized either," Steven said coldly. The officer's face dropped. Steven stepped forward. "People begged for help," he continued, "and you ignored them." The neighborhood went silent, because nobody had ever spoken to the police like that here. Steven didn't yell. He didn't insult. He spoke with calm truth. "And then," Steven added, "when they finally fight back, you arrive with questions." The crowd felt chills. The officer tried to respond, but Steven raised his hand. "I'm not here to fight cops," Steven said. "I'm here to end injustice." The officer nodded slowly. Then he said, "Sir, we have video footage from multiple homes. We can use it." That's when everyone realized Jax had made his biggest mistake. He attacked in the age of cameras. Every window had footage. Every street corner recorded his men. And within an hour, the videos were already spreading online. TikTok clips, Facebook shares, YouTube reposts. The headline went viral. "Neighborhood gang tries to ambush a man." They had no idea it was Steven Seagal. Views exploded. Millions. Then tens of millions. People all over the world started talking. Real justice. Protect the innocent. This is why bullies deserve consequences. But the neighborhood wasn't celebrating violence. They were celebrating something else. Freedom. A teenage boy walked up to Steven carefully. He was nervous. "Sir," he said, voice shaking. Is it true you're Steven Seagal? Steven looked at him calmly. Yes. The boy's eyes filled with emotion. My little brother hasn't played outside in months, he whispered. Last night, you gave us our street back. Steven's face softened slightly. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then protect it, Steven said. Because justice isn't one man's job. It's a community's duty. Real heroes don't create followers. They create leaders. As the police prepared reports, an officer received call. His face changed. He turned to Steven. We just got confirmation, he said quietly. Jax is being tracked. He can't run now. Steven nodded slowly. The neighborhood watched Steven like he was something they'd never seen. A man who didn't buy respect. He earned it. And when Steven finally walked away, the people didn't call him a celebrity. They called him something bigger, a symbol of justice. Do you believe the police would have acted if Steven wasn't there? Comment. Yes or a no. And tell me, should Jax get a second chance or a full punishment? By evening, the neighborhood no longer felt like a place held hostage. It felt like a place that had finally woken up. Kids returned to the streets slowly, not running at first, just stepping outside cautiously like they were testing if freedom was real. Shop owners opened their shutters wide for the first time in months. Even the air felt different, lighter, but deep down, everyone knew one truth. Jax wouldn't disappear unless the system finally did what it was supposed to do. And this time, the system couldn't ignore it, because the evidence was everywhere. Security cameras, balcony videos, phone recordings, street footage. The whole city had seen what happened. When injustice is hidden, it survives. But when injustice is exposed, it collapses. Late that night, police vehicles flooded the far end of the street. Not 2 cars this time, not 3, a full operation. Neighbors gathered from windows as officers moved quickly, communicating on radios. Steven stood quietly near Mr. College's shop, hand behind his back, watching, not to control the police, but to witness the moment the neighborhood had waited for. Suddenly, a black SUV tried to speed away from the area, but officers blocked the road. Lights flashed, tires screeched, and within seconds, the vehicle stopped. The door opened. Jack stepped out, trying to look calm, but his eyes were not calm anymore. They were desperate. He glanced around and saw cameras again, the same cameras that had destroyed his power overnight. The officer in charge stepped forward. Jax, he said, you're under arrest. Jax smirked bitterly. For what? For defending my people. The officer didn't even blink. For extortion, assault, threats, weapons, terrorizing citizens. The charges hit like a hammer. Jax's smirk faded. He turned his head slowly and saw Steven. Steven wasn't smiling. Steven wasn't celebrating. He just stood there like a wall. Jax stared at him for a long second, then whispered, You ruined everything. Steven stepped forward, and his reply was calm, simple, and deadly truthful. No, Steven said. You ruined everything. The moment you chose fear over respect. The neighbors watched Jax get handcuffed. Some people felt satisfaction. Others felt disbelief, because for so long, they had believed Jax was untouchable. But tonight proved something powerful. No one is untouchable forever. As Jax was placed into the car, he looked back at the street, at the shops, at the people, at the children. And for the first time, he saw what he really had been doing. He wasn't running the street. He was destroying lives. Some criminals don't fear jail. They fear losing control. The police cars left, and the street remained quiet. But now it was the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like safety. Neighbors stepped out slowly. Mr. College came near Steven again. He struggled to speak. And finally he said, Sir, how do we thank you? Steven looked at him, then at the crowd. And for the first time in this entire story, Steven spoke like a teacher, not a fighter. You don't thank me, he said. You learn from this. He turned toward the teenagers standing near the street corner. Let me tell you something, Steven said. Gangs don't start powerful. They become powerful when good people stay silent. The teens listened deeply. Steven continued, If you want this neighborhood to stay safe, don't wait for a hero. Protect each other. Stand together. Speak up early. The crowd nodded, because the truth was painful. They had stayed quiet too long. Then an old uncle raised his hand and asked, "Stephen, why did you even come here? Why did you choose this place?" Stephen paused. Then he spoke quietly. "Because I wanted peace," he said, "and I found a community that deserved it." The crowd's eyes grew emotional. A small child walked forward and held Stephen's hand. The kid whispered, "Are we safe now?" Stephen looked down at him. His eyes softened. "Yes," Stephen replied, "but only if we stay united." The neighborhood residents began forming a small circle, not around Stephen like fans, but around each other like a family. And that night, something beautiful happened. Shopkeepers offered free tea. Neighbors talked like old friends again. Kids played without fear. A street that had been stolen was finally returned. Urban justice isn't about violence. It's about stopping evil before it grows. It's about unity. It's about courage. And most of all, it's about respect. Stephen walked away slowly into the night. No spotlight, no fame. Just a man who came, did what was right, and disappeared like justice always should. If you believe no one should be judged by power or fear, type respect in the comments. And if you want more powerful fictional stories like this, subscribe and join the family.